How far back do you go with this thing? What is the thing that transforms beef prepared in a certain way into a hamburger or a burger? Like, what is the moment? Maybe we'll figure it out together.
All right.
The earliest, or one of the earliest origins you see of some kind of preparation like this, it's a bit of a stretch, but it included booze, so I wanted to bring it up here.
Cool.
Romans. And there's written record of this. So in the 4th to 5th century AD, in the Roman cookbook Apicius, it records a dish of minced beef pounded with white bread that had been soaked in wine, pepper, pine nuts, something called garum, which was a fish sauce, shaped into a patty, wrapped in coal fat, and then grilled.
Okay.
So, no bun. Also, another detail on this, the patties were glazed with a sauce that was a reduction of grape must, so kind of wine as well. I think it was like a sweet wine. Right. So you have wine in the mince, in the panard, the bread mixture, wine on the glaze, but it wasn't being eaten between bread. So, I don't know.
Kind of a meatball. Yeah.
And then throughout...
Kind of a crepinette. Do you know what crepinettes are?
Yeah.
The sort of patty, typically pork, but wrapped in caul fat, kind of served as a luncheon in fine French places or whatever.
It's interesting because we would use crepinette as a synonym for caul fat in the bistro.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know whether that is maybe maybe that is the French name of the ingredient, of the material.
Yeah, could be, but yeah, I've always known it as the dish.
As the dish, yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very plausible. Throughout the medieval times as well, like big elaborate roasts would be served with these kind of meatball-y things that resemble this Roman ancestor, and but again, not being eaten in buns. Then we come to the name, the Hamburger, right? So before it was American, a lot of claims do point to the German port city, and in the 19th century, was known for high-quality beef exports.
Okay.
Apparently. Most importantly as well, during the 19th century, and I think this is one of the biggest moments for the burger, the invention of the meat grinder.
I was about to say, the grinder has to really play a role in its popularity, because mincing meat by hand probably, on large scale, not going to happen very, very, very efficiently. And also, the grinder coming along is one thing, but also just the quality of knives, the quality of cutting boards, the quality of getting a minced meat product probably just wasn't the most common way to eat things.
And what problem are you solving by mincing meat, by hand, right? Like if it's a tougher cut of meat, then you just braise it.
Right.
If it's a really nice cut of meat, then just keep it as a steak.
Right.
So there's that. But German immigrants arriving in America through the port of New York bring the Hamburg steak, which is chopped beef, lightly salted, often with onions and breadcrumbs. 1873, Delmonico's in New York lists an 11-cent Hamburg steak developed by chef Charles Ranhofer. It's the oldest English language menu reference to the dish. And interestingly, it cost twice as much as the regular beefsteak. So it was a delicacy, not a cheaper thing.
That's okay.
Yeah.
At 11 cents, it was twice as much.
Yeah. So what was the other one? 5.5 cents?
Yeah.
Maybe 6. I don't know. Then between the 1880s...
because it was more work. There was more processing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also it's foreign. Maybe, it has a bit of that allure.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Cachet.
the European cachet. Between the late 1800s is when we really see people trying to claim this thing, especially with the buns. Mm-hmm. So there's a bunch of claims here, and people, and at least 6 towns and people who have their claims. Starting in 1885, Hamburger Charlie Negreen. He flattened his meatballs at the Seymour, Wisconsin County Fair. so that fairgoers could walk and eat. Seymour, the town, calls itself the home of the hamburger and throws a burger fest every August. Also in 1885, at a different county fair, Frank and Charles Menches ran out of pork sausages at the Erie County Fair in Hamburg, New York.
All right.
So they subbed in ground beef. Feel like that town name is doing quite a lot for their claim.
Okay.
Later in the 1880s, Uncle Fletcher Davis, serves a ground beef and mustard sandwich at his Athens, Texas lunch counter. 1891.
I mean, that one sounds close because he said the word sandwich.
Sandwich.
That changes it, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a hunk of meat that I'm walking around at the county fair eating.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Also, like, how does squashing a meatball into a patty make it any easier?
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking the same thing.
It's still hot.
I'm still going back to the 11 cent thing because you said the guy's name and it was a German name. I think he was playing on the cachet because he's like, this is from Hamburg, Germany. I'm German.
Yeah.
This is a cachet.
This is how we do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Oscar Weber Bilby, 1891, puts grilled patties on a yeast bun in a Tulsa, Oklahoma picnic.
All right.
His claim isn't inventing the burger. His claim is being the first to put it on an actual bun,
Right.
not bread.
Not just bread, sure.
Not toast. And then in 1900, probably the most famous story out of all of them, Louis Lassen presses ground steak trimmings between two slices of toast at his New Haven, Connecticut lunch wagon.
Louis Lunch.
Louis Lunch. This is the one that the Library of Congress would eventually recognize in 2000 as the first hamburger. To this day, they still cook on cast iron vertical broilers, and they refuse to serve it on a bun or with ketchup.
That's right. It's on just white bread toasted, and you can get mustard. And I think I've never had it, but I've seen plenty of videos about it. I think you can get pickles.
I think it's pickles, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that as well, right? And it's interesting, like all these different ingredients being added to the collective conscious or subconscious of what this thing will eventually become. And then just to go back to our American theme and some final things on the origins here. 1921, Walt Anderson and Billy Ingram opened the first ever White Castle in Wichita, Kansas. They were serving square 5-cent sliders, smashed with onions, identical at every location. It becomes the first fast food hamburger chain, and Time magazine would later call it the most influential burger of all time.
Right. And I think that the thing that they really did, I had a little note from them too. What you just kind of said is they took the idea from this sort of questionable, who knows what I'm going to get answer to something trusted and standardized. I think that was that's the turning point.
Yeah.
Is having something that is a known entity. They codified it.
Yeah. Weird, the White Castle. I mean, I grew up, my first, as anyone outside of the country might have had a similar experience, my first reference for White Castle was Harold and Kumar Get the Munchies. And I wanted to go to one so bad for so long. And then I ended up living in Sunnyside, where there was one 2 blocks across the road from me. Went late one night. Extremely disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, it is its own thing. We didn't have those in the South where I'm from. We had the dupe. It's called Crystal. Mm-hmm. So you had Crystal and White Castle. They're effectively the same thing. Little square burgers, steamed buns, the steamed onions, which are rehydrated dried onions. There's a very specific flavor. I can taste it right now just talking about it. And you don't eat one. They're tiny. You literally order them by the dozen. Like my dad, I think, would eat 2 dozen at a time. It's like they're like the size of. I just thought of it right now, but like they're kind of like the size of a big oyster. Like you're eating 24 oysters. Not that big a deal. They're so soft you can ball them up and put 2 in your mouth entirely, or maybe even more. It's the patty itself is. I will say this, and this is a unique thing that I didn't have in my notes or anything. I kind of forgot about it, but what you and I culinary dudes refer to as the fish spatula.
Yeah,
that was invented at White Castle. It was made to flip that little tiny square steamed burger because
that's cool.
The burger looks like a cracker. Basically, it's about the size of a saltine cracker in every dimension, and then it's got holes in it. so that the meat steams on the flat top. They cook really fast, and then they invented that flipper, they called it, but we all know it as a fish bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something you said as well was very visceral for me too. The flavor of those patties.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminded me of the burgers or the mincemeat that you would get for school dinner at the school cafeteria when I was growing up. And it was like, ugh, this doesn't taste like normal burgers. It's got like a kind of metallic-y kind of weirdness.
We're not getting any Maillard reaction. They're overwhelmingly, they're steamed.
Gotcha.
It's a steamed burger. So that's not the most memorable. Like we have so many memories of ground beef having browning, and in this case, it doesn't. That
is the answer. That's a great point.
Mm-hmm. But weirdly, like I'd eat a pile of them if they were sitting right here.
Oh yeah,
like they're craveable. They're tasty. They wouldn't be in business this long if they weren't.
They're also kind of like a vehicle for sauce and condiments and whatnot. I think sadly, a White Castle just shut down this week as we're recording it. I think I saw that on Instagram. But I think the Sunnyside one is still going. It definitely didn't look like that location, but it's iconic. 2 final things to note here. Then I've got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Circa 1924, 16-year-old Lionel Sternberger.
He has a burger in his name.
Dropped a slice of cheese on a patty at the right spot in Pasadena, California. The menu called it the aristocratic burger.
Ooh.
There's somewhere else. Kalen's in Louisville, Kentucky claims its own cheeseburger to be the first after they opened in 1934. And then in 1935, Louis Ballast of Denver's Humpty Dumpty Drive-In tried to trademark the word cheeseburger. In fact, they did trademark it, but it was no good whatsoever, and everyone continued using that term.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to this day, as we know.
They didn't vehemently fight for their mark.
So speaking of which...
Listen, if the Chicago Bulls can trademark the term three-peat, they just didn't try hard enough is all I'm saying.
The big game.